It was a bright afternoon when a wealthy CEO stepped out of his office after a long meeting. His car waited for him at the curb, but for some reason, he asked his driver to give him a little time alone. He decided to walk through the park nearby. The world knew him as a man of power and success. He was the kind of person who was always in the headlines, always praised for his sharp mind and his business empire. But deep inside, despite all the attention and the comfort around him, he often felt something missing. He couldn't name it, but there was a quiet emptiness that never left him. That day, as he strolled through the park, he noticed families enjoying their time together. Parents laughed with their children, couples shared quiet conversations, and kids ran around freely. For him, it was a rare scene to witness up close. He usually moved from one meeting to another, one office to another, without stopping to notice the small things happening around him. But today was different. Something about the fresh air, the sound of kids playing, and the sight of ordinary people living simple lives caught his attention. He paused near a bench, pretending to check his phone, but in truth, his eyes were drawn to one particular corner of the park. There, under the shade of a tree, sat a single father with his young daughter. The man looked tired, his clothes worn but neat. He had a kind face, though lines of worry and exhaustion were visible. His daughter sat close to him, holding a small toy in her hands. Her smile was bright, but her movements were slower than the other children's. She had a disability that made it difficult for her to walk and play like others. The father watched her with deep love, his eyes following every little step she took. Every time she stumbled, his body tensed, ready to rush and help, but he held back, wanting her to try on her own. It was clear that he adored his daughter, but it was also clear how heavy his struggles were. The CEO, standing quietly at a distance, could sense it. The little girl looked toward a group of children playing with a ball. Her eyes lit up with excitement. She wanted to join them, to laugh and play like any other child. Slowly, she walked over, her steps uneven, but her spirit strong. She reached out her hand to one of the kids, hoping to be welcomed into their game. But instead of kindness, the unexpected happened. The group of children looked at her differently. One boy whispered something, and soon they began to laugh. They mimicked the way she walked, pointing fingers at her. Her small smile faded as she realized what they were doing. She stood frozen, her little hands clutching her toy tighter. The sound of their laughter cut through the park. The father, sitting on the bench, clenched his fists. His heart ached seeing his daughter mocked so cruelly. He wanted to shout, to protect her, but he also knew he couldn't control the world. He lowered his head, his eyes wet with tears he tried to hide. The CEO's steps stopped completely. His chest tightened as he watched the scene unfold. He was used to seeing people fight over money, deals, and power, but this was different. This was a little child facing a pain she didn't deserve. He glanced at the father, who looked broken yet helpless. For a moment, the CEO stood silently, his mind racing. He had never been in a position like this. He had been the man making billion-dollar decisions, but right now, the real decision was not about money. It was about humanity. Something deep inside him stirred, stronger than any boardroom instinct he ever had. He started walking toward the group, his tall figure commanding attention, without even trying. The children noticed him approaching, and their laughter slowly faded. The park grew quieter as people sensed something was happening. The little girl looked up, her eyes wide, unsure of who this man was or why he was coming closer. The father noticed too. His tired eyes lifted, and for the first time, there was a flicker of surprise. He recognized the man instantly. Almost everyone did. The wealthy CEO who owned companies, who was on magazine covers, who lived a life that seemed out of reach for ordinary people. He was now walking straight toward his daughter. But the CEO's eyes were not on his reputation. They were fixed on the little girl, who stood trembling, her cheeks red with embarrassment. He stopped right in front of her and bent down so he could look at her face directly. His expression softened, his voice calm but warm. "You know," he said gently, "it takes real courage to step forward and try to join a game. That's something most people don't have. You are stronger than all of them combined." The little girl blinked, her lips parting slightly, as if she wasn't sure whether to believe him. For a moment, The pain in her eyes was replaced by a small glimmer of hope. The children who had been laughing shuffled uncomfortably, glancing at each other. The CEO turned his gaze toward them. His voice remained steady, but there was weight in his words. Laughing at someone's weakness doesn't make you strong. Real strength comes from kindness. If you ever want to be truly respected, start by respecting others. The kids lowered their heads, embarrassed. Some of them stepped back, no longer daring to meet his eyes. The father watched all of this silently. His heart swelled with mixed emotions, relief, gratitude, and a strange disbelief that someone like this CEO would step in for his daughter. The little girl, still holding her toy, looked up at the man and whispered softly, "Thank you." The CEO smiled. "Don't thank me. You already showed the world how brave you are." At that moment, the father could no longer hold back his tears. He wiped his face quickly, but the CEO noticed. Without hesitation, he walked over and sat beside him on the bench. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he simply sat there, sharing the silence, as if to say he understood. And that was the beginning of a connection neither of them expected that day. The father sat quietly on the bench, still shaken by what had just happened. His daughter leaned against him, clutching her toy close to her chest. She tried to smile again, but anyone watching could see how deeply the cruel laughter had hurt her. The wealthy CEO glanced at the two of them, his heart heavy with thoughts he hadn't felt in years. After a moment, he finally spoke to the father in a calm voice. "She's strong," he said softly, nodding toward the girl. "You've raised her well." The father gave a tired smile, the kind of smile that hides more pain than it reveals. "I try," he whispered. His voice carried both pride and exhaustion. The CEO didn't push further. Instead, he allowed the silence to linger. He had learned in business that silence often told more than words. And here, too, he could see the father's story written in the lines of his face, in the way his shoulders slumped, and in the way he held onto his daughter, as if she was the only treasure he had in the world. The little girl, still shy from the incident, rested her head on her father's arm. The CEO watched her closely and thought about the difference between his world and theirs. He had everything money could buy, yet sitting there, he could see that this father and daughter had something rare, an unbreakable bond built on sacrifice and love. After a few quiet moments, the CEO asked gently, "Do you live nearby?" The father nodded. "A few blocks away. I bring her here after work so she can feel like other kids, even if only for a little while." His words carried a deep sadness, as though he feared his daughter's childhood was slipping away without the joys most children took for granted. The CEO tilted his head. "Work must keep you busy. What do you do?" The man sighed, his shoulders sinking further. "I take whatever jobs I can find. Construction, night shifts at a store, sometimes delivery. Anything to keep food on the table." He paused, then added with a trembling voice, "Her medical bills, they never stop. But she's my whole life. No matter how hard it gets, I can't let her down." Those words pierced the CEO's heart. He had been in countless meetings where people argued over profits, over numbers written on paper. Yet here was a man who fought battles every single day just to keep his daughter smiling. The father hesitated before continuing. "I lost my wife a few years ago. Since then, it's just been me and her. Some days, I don't know how I'll manage, but I look at her and I keep going." His eyes watered, but he quickly looked away, ashamed to show his weakness in front of a stranger. The CEO felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to these conversations, raw, painful, unpolished truths. In his world, people spoke carefully, hiding their real struggles behind smiles and suits. But here, sitting on a worn-out park bench, everything was real. The little girl looked up at her father and tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, can we play a little more?" she asked in her soft voice. The father forced another smile, nodding gently. "Of course, sweetheart." She stood up slowly, her small legs trembling as she tried to balance herself. She moved toward the swings, determined to enjoy what little time they had together. The CEO's eyes followed her, his mind racing. He turned back to the father and asked carefully, "Does anyone help you?" The man shook his head. "No family nearby. Friends try, but they have their own lives. Most days, it feels like it's just me against the world. But that's all right. She's worth every struggle. Those words echoed in the CEO's mind. Worth every struggle. He thought about his own life, the luxurious houses, the cars, the endless meetings, and the applause he often received. Yet, when he compared it to this man's simple declaration, his success suddenly felt small. The CEO remembered nights in his glass-walled office, staring out at the city, feeling a loneliness he couldn't explain. Now, sitting beside a man who owned almost nothing, he realized that loneliness had a name. It was the absence of love, the absence of purpose beyond himself. He watched as the little girl giggled on the swing, her laughter filling the air despite everything she had faced only moments before. That sound struck him more than any business victory ever had. The father looked at his daughter with tired eyes, but a heart full of love. "She doesn't know how hard things are," he said softly. "I don't let her see it. I want her to believe the world can be good, even if it's not always kind." The CEO swallowed hard. He knew then that the man wasn't just strong, he was extraordinary. To carry such a heavy burden every single day, and yet to still protect his daughter's innocence, was something that no amount of money could ever buy. A part of the CEO wanted to stand up, shake the man's hand, and walk away. But another part of him felt that he couldn't. Something inside told him this was not the end of their meeting. It was the beginning of something else, something far more important than any business deal he had ever signed. As the sun began to set, the CEO realized he wasn't ready to leave the park. Not yet. He needed to understand more. He needed to see how far this father's love went, and what, if anything, he could do about it. That evening marked the moment when two very different lives crossed paths, one of endless wealth but hidden emptiness, and the other of endless struggle but a heart full of love. Neither of them knew it yet, but both were about to be changed forever. The park was slowly filling with more families as the evening settled in. Parents were calling their children for snacks, couples strolled under the trees, and laughter echoed across the playground. The single father sat watching his daughter on the swing, the gentle creak of the chains matching the rhythm of her uneven movements. She wasn't as fast as the other kids, but her smile showed she didn't care. For her, just being part of the world around her was a gift. The CEO sat silently on the bench beside the father, his expensive suit and polished shoes oddly out of place in the dusty park. Yet, in that moment, he didn't care about appearances. His eyes followed the little girl with quiet attention. He found himself thinking of her bravery, her effort to keep smiling even though life hadn't made things easy for her. After a while, the girl looked toward a group of children playing nearby. They were kicking a ball back and forth, their laughter loud and carefree. Her eyes lit up. She wanted to join them. She wanted, just for a while, to feel like she belonged with them. She slid off the swing carefully, her toy still in her hand, and began walking toward the group. Each step was small and shaky, but she carried herself with determination. Her father straightened up on the bench, ready to rush if she stumbled, but he stayed seated, letting her try on her own. The CEO noticed how tightly the man gripped the edge of the bench. He could feel the father's silent prayer that the children would accept his daughter. The little girl finally reached the group. She smiled, her eyes full of hope, and stretched her hand out to one of the boys as if to ask if she could play. For a brief second, the playground seemed to hold its breath. But instead of welcoming her, one of the kids let out a laugh. He nudged his friend and whispered something. The next moment, the group burst into giggles. One boy exaggerated her uneven steps, mocking the way she walked. Another pointed at her hands, making faces as if she was strange. Their laughter grew louder, echoing through the park. The little girl froze. Her small hand slowly dropped to her side. Her toy slipped and fell into the sand, but she didn't even notice. Her bright smile faded, replaced by confusion and hurt. She didn't understand why they were laughing. She had only wanted to play. On the bench, her father's heart shattered. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to run over, to shield her, to yell at those children for their cruelty. But a heavy sadness kept him still. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Every time, it broke him a little more. He lowered his head, his jaw trembling, trying to stop the tears that threatened to spill. He didn't want his daughter to see him cry. The CEO felt his chest tighten as he watched the scene. He had seen ruthless competition in boardrooms, betrayal in business, and greed on a scale most couldn't imagine. But nothing compared to this. This was innocence being crushed. This was cruelty in its rawest form. And it was aimed at a child who deserved none of it. The laughter of the children carried on, louder and sharper. A few adults glanced in their direction, saw what was happening, and quickly looked away. Some pretended not to notice, too uncomfortable to intervene. The CEO's jaw set. Something inside him refused to stay silent. He stood up. His tall frame and sharp presence drew immediate attention. The sound of his polished shoes on the gravel made even the laughing children pause. Without saying a word, he walked straight toward the group. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, and even the adults nearby stopped to watch. The little girl lifted her eyes, startled to see the man approaching. She clutched her toy from the ground and held it close, unsure of what he was going to do. The children shifted uneasily, their laughter dying down as the CEO's shadow fell over them. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he bent down until he was at the girl's level. His expensive suit brushed against the dust, but he didn't care. He looked into her tearful eyes with a gentle expression. "You know," he said softly, "it takes a very strong heart to walk up and ask to play. That's something even adults can't always do. You're stronger than you think." The little girl blinked at him, her lips trembling. She wasn't sure how to respond, but his kind words made her chest feel a little lighter. The CEO then straightened up and turned his gaze toward the children. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. Laughing at someone doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you stronger. Real strength is in kindness. If you want respect, if you want to be remembered for something good, start by treating others the way you'd want to be treated. The playground went silent. The children shuffled awkwardly, some glancing down at their shoes, others glancing at each other with guilt. Their game had stopped completely. The father, still seated on the bench, lifted his head slowly. His eyes were filled with disbelief. He had expected the laughter to go on, for his daughter to walk back in tears, for another painful memory to be added to their lives. Instead, he watched as a man, someone he never thought would notice them, stood up for his little girl when no one else had. The girl's eyes shone with a faint smile now. She whispered softly, almost too quiet to hear, "Thank you." The CEO's lips curved into a small smile. "Don't thank me. You're the brave one." For a moment, time seemed to stand still in that park. The wealthy man who had built an empire, and the little girl who had just faced cruelty, stood side by side. The world often measured success in money, but in that instant, the CEO knew there was a different kind of success, standing up for what's right. The father's eyes grew wet again, but this time they weren't only from pain. They were from relief, gratitude, and the quiet feeling that, just maybe, they weren't as alone in this world as he had always believed. The park slowly settled back into its usual rhythm. The sound of children playing returned, though now softer, as if even they understood something important had just taken place. The wealthy CEO, who had just stood up for the little girl, turned back toward the bench. The father was still seated, his eyes fixed on his daughter. She had gone back to the swing, clutching her toy, her face brighter now than it had been just moments ago. The CEO walked over and lowered himself onto the bench beside the man. His expensive suit creased against the old wooden seat, but for once, he didn't care about appearances. He sat quietly, giving the father space. Sometimes silence spoke louder than any question. After a few moments, the father finally turned his head. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Not many people would have done what you just did," he said. "Most just look away." The CEO glanced at him. "Looking away is easy," he replied softly. "But it doesn't make the world better." The father gave a faint smile, though his eyes were still tired. "You're right. But when you live like we do, you get used to people turning their backs." The CEO leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. He wanted to understand more. Something inside him felt drawn to this man and his daughter in a way he couldn't explain. He had spent his life in a world of power and wealth, yet sitting here, he realized there was more truth on this old park bench than in any boardroom he had ever been in. "Tell me," he asked carefully, "how do you manage it all? Raising her, working, handling everything on your own." The father sighed, his chest rising and falling heavily. "Some days, I don't even know myself. I take odd jobs, whatever I can find. Construction in the morning, stocking shelves at night. Sometimes deliveries on weekends. I don't sleep much, but it keeps food on the table and pays for part of her treatment." He paused, his eyes following his daughter as she kicked her legs gently on the swing. "Doctors say she'll always need extra care. Therapy, medicine, appointments, it all costs more than I can ever make. But I keep trying. I can't let her down." The CEO felt a heaviness in his chest. He had signed deals worth millions without blinking. Yet here was a man breaking himself apart just to afford the basics for his child. The father hesitated before continuing. His voice grew even softer. "I wasn't always alone. Her mother, she was the strong one. She held us together. But I lost her a few years ago. Since then, it's just been me and my little girl. Some nights, when she's asleep, I sit there and wonder how much longer I can keep this up. But then I look at her face, and I know I have to. She's the reason I wake up, the reason I fight." His words trembled toward the end, and he quickly looked away, embarrassed to show so much vulnerability to a stranger, especially one like the CEO, whose world seemed so far removed from his own. But the CEO didn't see weakness. He saw strength unlike any he had ever known. Strength not built on money or influence, but on love. A kind of love that carried pain silently, without asking for recognition. The CEO cleared his throat, his voice quiet. "Do you ever get help? Friends, family, anyone?" The father shook his head. "No family close by. Friends try, but they have their own lives. It feels like it's just us most of the time. That's all right. She's enough. She gives me purpose." Those words hit the CEO harder than he expected. She gives me purpose. He thought about his own life, his empire, his endless meetings, the applause at events, the luxury surrounding him. Yet, how often did he feel real purpose? For years, he had filled the emptiness inside him with success and possessions. But sitting here beside this man, he realized how shallow it all seemed. The CEO's eyes drifted back to the little girl. Despite her earlier pain, she was laughing again, her small giggles mixing with the creak of the swing. That sound stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. The father spoke again, his voice steady this time. "I just want her to believe the world is good. Even when it isn't, I don't want her to lose hope. If I can give her that, then maybe I've done my job as her dad." The CEO swallowed hard, his throat tight. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. In his world, people often spoke about ambition, about profits, about goals. But here was a man whose only ambition was to protect his daughter's smile. It was humbling in a way he could not put into words. The two men sat in silence again, watching the little girl swing back and forth. The sun had dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Families began leaving the park, but the CEO remained seated, as if his heart was rooted to that very bench. Finally, he spoke, his voice almost to himself. "You've done more with less than most people do with everything." The father glanced at him, confused. But the CEO didn't explain further. He simply kept watching the girl, his mind racing with thoughts he wasn't ready to share yet. For the first time in years, the CEO felt something shift inside him. He realized this meeting wasn't an accident. It was a moment meant to open his eyes. And though he didn't yet know how, he was certain of one thing. He couldn't just walk away. The evening air grew cooler, and the sun's glow began to fade. The park emptied slowly, but the father and his daughter remained, as if they were holding on to these last moments of peace before life's weight pressed down on them again. The CEO stayed too, seated quietly beside the man. He didn't check his phone, didn't rush back to his car, didn't think about the meetings he had pushed aside. For once, he felt that where he was right now mattered more than anywhere else he could be. The father leaned back slightly, his eyes still on his daughter. She had moved from the swing to the sandbox, carefully building a small tower with her toy resting beside her. She was so absorbed in her little world that she didn't notice how closely her father watched her every move. "She doesn't know how hard life is," the man said after a long pause, his voice soft but steady. "And I don't ever want her to. She thinks the world is full of good people, full of kindness. I let her believe that. I want her childhood to be filled with hope, not fear." The CEO turned his head toward him, studying his face. The man's eyes were worn, but there was no bitterness in them. Only love and a kind of determination that seemed to keep him standing even when everything else tried to knock him down. He hesitated before asking, "But doesn't it get too heavy, carrying it all alone?" The father exhaled, his chest sinking with the weight of his answer. "Every single day. There are nights when I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'll pay the next bill, or if I'll still have work tomorrow. There are mornings when I leave before the sun comes up, just so she doesn't see the worry on my face. But I tell myself, if I break, she'll break. And I can't let that happen." The CEO looked down at his hands. His fingers, manicured and smooth, told the story of a life untouched by such burdens. He thought about his own nights, spent in penthouses with city views, yet often filled with silence that echoed too loudly. He had wealth, but it hadn't spared him from emptiness. And here, beside him, was a man with almost nothing but love, yet he carried more meaning in his life than the CEO ever had. The father continued, almost as if he needed to let the words out. "Sometimes I feel invisible. People pass by, and all they see is a tired man with a struggling kid. They don't know how much she means to me. They don't know the battles we fight. But that's all right. I don't need them to understand. All I need is to keep her safe, to keep her happy." The CEO's chest tightened. For years, he had lived in a world where people fought to be seen, to be recognized, to be praised. He had built his empire on visibility, on reputation. And yet, the man beside him carried his life quietly, almost invisibly, and in that silence was a kind of greatness the CEO had never known. He glanced back at the little girl. She laughed softly as her tower of sand collapsed, then clapped her hands as if it was all part of the fun. That small laugh carried more joy than any of his lavish parties ever had. The CEO leaned back on the bench, his voice quieter than before. "You've been doing this all alone for years?" The father nodded. "Since she was a baby. Her mother got sick after she was born. We tried everything, but..." His voice broke slightly. He stopped, took a breath, and then continued. "When she passed, I thought I'd fall apart. But then I looked at my daughter, so small, so innocent, and I knew I had no choice. She needed me more than I needed my grief." The CEO closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. He had attended funerals of powerful men, seen people cry over fortunes lost or gained, but nothing compared to this quiet confession. It wasn't said for sympathy. It was simply the truth of a man who had chosen love over despair. Opening his eyes again, the CEO spoke almost to himself. "You're stronger than you know." The father shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'm not strong. I'm just a dad trying not to fail his little girl." But to the CEO, those words were strength itself. In his world, strength was measured by numbers, by assets, by victories. Sitting here, he realized strength was also measured in quiet sacrifices no one ever saw, in battles fought in silence, in the choice to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. The little girl ran up to her father then, her cheeks pink from the cool air. "Daddy, look what I made," she said, holding out her toy, now covered with grains of sand. The father chuckled and brushed the sand from her hands. "It's beautiful," he told her, his voice full of warmth. She smiled, satisfied, before running back to the sandbox. The CEO watched the exchange closely. For a fleeting moment, he envied the man. Not his struggles, not his poverty, but the simple, irreplaceable bond he shared with his daughter. It was something money could never buy. And in that moment, the CEO realized something about himself. For all the wealth he had gained, he had never truly known what it meant to give everything for someone else. He had built an empire, but he had never built a bond as strong as the one in front of him. The thought lingered in his mind, heavier with each passing minute. Perhaps this father, with nothing to his name but love, was richer than him in the ways that mattered most. The CEO knew then, this wasn't just an evening walk or a chance encounter. This was a lesson, a moment meant to open his eyes to what he had been missing all along. The sky had turned a deeper shade of orange, and the glow of the streetlights slowly flickered on around the park. The father gathered his daughter's things into a small worn-out bag, preparing to head home after a long day. The little girl still played happily, humming to herself, unaware of how deeply her presence had moved the man sitting beside them. The CEO stayed quiet, but his heart was full. He couldn't stop replaying everything he had just heard, the endless jobs, the lonely nights, the father's quiet sacrifices. He thought of the little girl's courage, her soft laughter after such cruelty, and the way her father's love held her world together. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but gentle. "You've carried a lot on your own," he said to the father. "More than most people could ever imagine. But no one should carry it alone forever." The father looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" The CEO hesitated for a moment. He had made countless decisions in his life, some involving fortunes, some changing the course of companies. Yet none felt as important as the one forming in his heart now. He turned fully toward the man, his expression serious. "I want to help you," he said simply. The father blinked, confused. "Help me? You don't even know me." The CEO nodded. "I know enough. I've seen the love you have for your daughter. I've seen the weight you carry. And I know what it feels like to have everything, yet feel empty. Maybe this is the reason I came here today, so I could meet you both." The father shook his head slowly, as if unsure whether to believe the words. "I don't need charity," he whispered. The CEO's voice softened. "This isn't charity. This is me finally doing something meaningful. Let me take care of her medical bills. Let me make sure she gets the education she deserves. And if you'll allow it, I can help you find stable work so you don't have to wear yourself down with 3 jobs at once." For a long moment, the father just stared at him, speechless. His throat tightened as he tried to process what was being offered. All the years of struggle, the endless nights of worry, the quiet prayers he had whispered when no one was listening. Was this the answer he had been waiting for? His eyes filled with tears he could no longer hide. He lowered his face into his hands, overcome by emotion. His shoulders shook as he let out the weight he had carried for so long. The CEO placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You've done more than enough on your own. Let someone stand with you now." The father lifted his head, his eyes red but shining. He whispered, "I don't even know how to thank you." The CEO shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just keep loving her the way you do. That's worth more than anything I could ever give." At that moment, the little girl ran up to them again, holding a handful of small flowers she had picked from the grass. "Daddy, look. I made a bouquet," she said, her voice full of joy. Her father pulled her close, hugging her tightly. He kissed the top of her head, whispering, "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Just like you." The CEO smiled softly as he watched them. Something inside him shifted forever. For years, he had believed his wealth defined him, that success was measured in profits and recognition. But sitting there, he finally understood. True wealth was measured in love, in compassion, in moments like this. As the 3 of them stood up to leave the park, the father carried his daughter's bag. The girl skipped along happily, and the CEO walked beside them, not as a powerful figure, but simply as a man who had found something real at last. That evening, the father and his daughter returned home with lighter hearts, and the CEO returned to his world of glass towers and luxury. But he was no longer the same man. His empire felt different now, less important compared to the promise he had silently made, to use his power not just for himself, but to make lives like theirs easier, kinder, and brighter. And for the first time in a very long time, as he sat alone in the back of his car, the CEO felt something he had been missing for years. He felt peace.